Welcome back. Primetime Showdown. The House January 6th Committee held its first primetime televised hearing, which starred bombshell details about the day of the riot and had testimony from all kinds of people, including from Capitol Police Officer Carolyn Edwards and British filmmaker Nick Quested.
It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe what I saw. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle.
We'll take a look at what was revealed during the hearings, what the January 6th committee has done so far, what they plan on doing, and how this affects the politics for the 2022 midterms and beyond. Plus, I have an important announcement to make about the show. We'll be taking a look at those stories and more today, June 10th, 2022. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics, all from the perspective of the youth. With me, your host, Ishan. Welcome back to the Ishan S. Show. Thank you so much for joining me here for our episode today. I hope you guys are doing spectacular. Yeah, we're using big words now. Okay, so before we get into today's episode, there's a few things I need to say. First, I'm very excited to announce that Ishan Media is opening its doors to new contributors, writers, polling, whatever, however you can contribute. As this show has grown, it's become more clear to me that I need more help than ever, with managing things like the political news blog, graphics, all kinds of things. So if you're interested in joining Ishan Media, we'd love to have you on the team. So if you want to join, please fill out the Google form labeled Ishan Media Contributor Form, which you can find on my social media bios, theishanshow.com, under the Apply tab there, and I'll also link the form in every episode description. And if you're someone who would like to come onto the Ishan S. Show as a guest, whether you're an office holder, a political candidate, whether you're a political media, you're an organizer, you're a student, anybody, then you can fill out the Ishan S. Show appearance form, which you can find in all the same places. In addition to that, you can email me at contact@theishansshow.com for inquiries, and you can also DM the Ishan S. Show on Instagram. There are more ways that I can count on my hands to join and contribute and appear on the Ishan S. Show, so take advantage of this and join the Ishan Media team today. One thing to note for contributor applicants, though, Ishan Media cannot pay you or provide service hours for your work at this time, but please do still consider applying. We'd love to have you. And then on to a more sour note. I've made this announcement before, and it's not easy, it's tough, but sometimes you have to make those kinds of announcements. So, after giving a lot of thought, I am sadly announcing that this season of the Ishan S. Show, Season 2, is coming to a close. The thing is that, like last time when I ended Season 1, my schedule is really going to hinder my ability to produce new episodes in the near future. So I just can't keep leaving for 3 months on end only to come back to make 2 episodes. I'm going to go on a hiatus, but while I'm gone, a lot of stuff is going to get done, and rest assured, I will be back. Unlike last time, this time I actually know when I'll be back for Season 3, and I'm so excited because this next season that I have planned is going to be the best. We have all kinds of things in the works. I can't reveal much right now, but, I can assure you that there's just a bunch of interesting stuff coming our way for Season 3. And as much as I hate to have to leave on a hiatus, I promise that we'll be back, and we'll be back soon. Quick programming note then, I guess. The season finale for this season will be posted on Tuesday, June 28th. So stay tuned. All right. So that was a lot of announcements. I'm looking at my clock right now, and we usually took out the amount of time we just took is usually the amount of time I spend on the top story segment. So we'll cut out that segment for this episode, and let's get straight into this week's episode topic. So I mentioned this on a previous episode that the House January 6th Committee, which we've talked about in depth on this show, would start holding their first public hearings this month. Now, what does that mean? And why is it significant? Well, for the past year, this committee, headed by Chairman Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi and Vice Chair Liz Cheney of Wyoming, and consisting of Representatives Adam Schiff, Zoe Lefgren, Pete Aguilar, Stephanie Murphy, Jamie Raskin, Elaine Luria, and Republican Adam Kinzinger, they have conducted a very, I would say, a robust investigation since last July when the committee started its work. Since they started, they have interviewed over 1,000 people. Big number, 1,000, since they started. They have testimony and depositions from people we've never heard of to top-level individuals like Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Trump's Secret Service people. So suffice to say, there has been a lot of work done by this committee in their effort to investigate what happened at the Capitol, in the Capitol, around the Capitol, in the White House, and in Donald Trump's mind during these riots. Now look, I've made it very clear on this show, and with the interactions I've had with many people regarding this, about what I think of January 6th. And here's what I say. It was not normal. It wasn't. It was an event that put the lives of 535 members of Congress, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, then Vice President Mike Pence, potentially the then Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. We didn't actually know where she was. But it potentially put her life and the lives of hundreds of Capitol police officers all at risk. And it wasn't peaceful at all. My goal is to promote and deliver unbiased journalism and fair reporting, and I'm going to report what is fact and the way it is in front of my eyes. That day, most Americans expected the Congress to meet in the House chamber, certify the presidential election, and then move on. Yeah, there would be some challenges to certain states' electoral results from Republicans here and there, but seeing the news beforehand, like reading all those articles, that was expected. And it started off that way. So, we had no reason to, think that we would see anything else, Members of Congress, VP Pence, Speaker Pelosi, all of them met in the House chamber to debate, or rather to certify the 2020 election. I was watching it as it happened on television. Side note, I'm the type of political nerd that watches things like this right from the beginning all the way to the end. But anyway, they met, and there were a few objections. After the first one, which was for the state of Arizona's electors, the two houses of Congress dispersed to their respective chambers to debate the substance of the objection and the claims. It was during this debate of the Arizona objection that rioters, a lot of them from the Stop the Steal rally that was just a few blocks away, they all started marching down to the Capitol. And some of them brought with them a serious spirit of riot and destruction with them. It was after this point that things became a lot more uncivil and the situation deteriorated really fast. I remember saying in a previous episode when I was talking about this, I think I said the blank hits the fan. You know what the blank is. By around 2:50 p.m. local time, people in this mob really were breaking in and breaching the security of the Capitol and entering the building in droves. It was around this point that most members of Congress started to get evacuated to an undisclosed location where they were secure from the rioters. After the National Guard was called and President Trump issued a video statement asking the rioters to leave, the crowd did begin to clear up, and order was restored. Congress met. There were a few more objections to certain slates of electors, but for the most part, they streamlined the process. And at 1:30 or 2:30 a.m., they certified the presidential election for President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, again, the goal is not to shimmer my opinion in my coverage of this. That is wrong, and that is inappropriate. But on both sides of political media these days, what we're seeing is just that. There's clearly a pre-selection of facts and information that organizations are presenting to their audiences. A lot of my viewers are young, so many of you don't necessarily are not necessarily, able to quickly grasp the type of coverage, but it's there. And there is a lot of selective reporting, if you will. One side is going to downplay it and even glorify what happened. One side is going to set this up as sedition against the government and even treason. I'm just going to report the facts that are clearly put in front of me, and you make your judgment based off of that. And what I saw, and what many of you saw, was a riot. Plain and simple, it was a riot. And a lot of the people there were Trump supporters. You can't deny that. There were Trump flags and photographs from that day, video presentations from all kinds of sources. Heck, even Trump supporting groups and individuals testified to this and were live streaming it with saying that they were there for the president. So the question isn't about who was there. The question is, why did this happen? Who did this? How did it unfold? Those are the questions that have been lingering for almost a year and a half now. Every day we get new testimony, new evidence, new videos, new confessions, new books, new reports, whatever. But those questions still continue to persist. Everybody has their viewpoint. I have mine. But until we can all sit down and see this information and evidence for ourselves together, it won't be clear. Now, as for the House January 6th committee, I've discussed their work at length before. Not everyone is happy with it. The Republican minority in the House think that the committee's work is illegitimate and a political smear job. I was just watching Fox News last night where I heard a host say that Democrats want to, conduct this investigation as a means to smear Republicans in time for the November elections this year. Democrats say that they want to investigate what happened that day to highlight Trump's work behind the attacks of that day. That's what their claim is. And again, I sound like a broken record, which is that I keep repeating the same idea that no one can agree. There are, however, Republicans on that committee, like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. There are some Republicans out there that do support the work of this committee, but Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are the only Republicans that are actually sitting on this committee, albeit banished from their party, essentially. Adam Kinzinger is a frequent Trump critic. He isn't running for re-election anymore. He said it was because it was time for him to move on. Liz Cheney, the daughter of conservative firebrand former Vice President Dick Cheney, who voted with President Trump 93% of the time, was kicked out of her number 3 House Republican leadership spot for breaking with Trump's views on the election. And along with Kinzinger, she was then censured, as in condemned, by the Republican National Committee. And now Cheney is fighting for her political life as Donald Trump has made it his number 1 priority to oust her via a primary challenge in her home state, which is going to take place in August. Okay, that was a look at January 6th, some of the events from that day, some of the key questions from that day, some of the work of the January 6th committee, among other things. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about last night's hearings, what unfolded, some of the testimony from live witnesses as well as depositions, and what members of the committee had to say. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. All right, we're back from the break. So last night, the January 6th committee held its first public hearing, which were televised and aired in prime time, which is that highly coveted 8 p.m. Eastern time slot. It's when all the big networks have on some of their best people, and it even kicks off the next few hours for the network. And those programs usually draw in millions of viewers. So the decision to hold these hearings in prime time on a Thursday evening, it was very deliberate. All the networks, major networks, aired the hearings, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, PBS, except for Fox. And look, I'm not going to call out any network for any reason because everyone has their very reserved opinions about each one. But what I will share is that Fox made a very interesting and peculiar decision to not air these hearings on their network. Instead, they put it on Fox Business, which, gets a fraction of what Fox News gets. Instead of, airing it on the network, they opted to put on their 3 primetime talk show hosts, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham, all 3 of whom, as we know, have downplayed what happened on January 6th. I will say it's unusual to see them do that because most of the time they're on top of this stuff and they'll also be airing these types of programs. And it's not like they weren't. They had if you watched Fox News last night, you would see the split screen on their network with the host on one side talking with their guests on, and then the committee's hearings going on the other side. They weren't actually playing any of the audio from the hearings, at least when I was watching. But anyway, that's not the main topic. The hearings, that's what we're talking about. They went on and they started right at 8 p.m. Chairman Benny Thompson kicked things off with his opening statement on the committee's work and their investigation. He talked about how there were moments when he thought Donald Trump was spearheading some of the election fraud claims, and they also talked about in depth, at least so more than what we've known so far, about what was going on in the White House and the West Wing during the actual riot. After him, Representative Cheney then gave her opening statement to the committee, in which she described some key things going on in the White House again during the riot and the response from the administration. It was then followed by Chairman Benny Thompson and Representative Cheney questioning the witnesses present at the hearing. Now, the committee relied a lot on previous depositions that they had obtained in their year-long investigation from some of the 1,000 people that they were interviewing. They used depositions to make a lot of their claims and establish a lot of their points of argument, using it as evidence. So then first on this list of notable depositions was former Attorney General William Barr. Now, Bill Barr served in the Trump administration as Trump's second Attorney General, and he was Trump's right-hand guy for the longest time. Like, Trump really liked Barr, and Barr was in return loyal and fought tooth and nail for his boss. They were like best friends. This really happened. They were like best friends. But then when it came to the election, Barr broke with the president. And I think if you follow William Barr, you would have at least some idea of this. Like, you can tell that Bill Barr was not on board with this very much, but we were not familiar to the extent to which he was against this. He first discredited his boss's claims, I think, late November, early December, and then he ended up resigning on December 23rd. So there was not a lot of love between the two towards the end. And their sentiments about, Bill Barr's sentiments, at least, about the election fraud claim weren't as public then, but the committee released some video, a deposition, indicating that. Take a listen to Attorney General William Barr's testimony to the January 6th committee in a previously recorded deposition.
First, and one was on December 14th, and I've been through sort of the give and take of those discussions, and in that context I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And I didn't want to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did. I observed, I think it was on December 1st, that how can you can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based on its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
There was a part in that clip that was bleeped out. You can play the actual tape to hear what he says. But anyway, in order to then further hone in on this point that senior administration officials were not on board with the voter fraud claim, the committee then played testimony from Trump's own daughter, Ivanka Trump, who agreed with Attorney General Barr's point that there was no voter fraud, at least widespread voter fraud in the election. Take a listen to Ivanka Trump.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
That's President Trump's own daughter, who had a senior-level spot in the Trump administration, saying to the committee that she didn't agree with her dad's position on widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election. And then there was another claim, other than the voter fraud claim. This claim was made in the hearing by Representative Liz Cheney. This was about the response to the actual event. She said that when this was going on, it was the response that we saw from the military, while it was a little late, the actual response that we saw was not done by Trump, but rather by Mike Pence, the vice president, who, mind you, was probably hiding for his life because the rioters were shouting, "Hang Mike Pence." They were out for him. This was actually such a concern for Vice President Pence's staff that the night before, on January 5th, his staff reportedly at least, went to the Secret Service to ask them to increase Pence's security because they genuinely feared for their boss's safety. Now, there's a lot that can be discussed on Mike Pence's role on January 6th, like the fact that there was a reported effort to get him out of the picture, as in, like, get him off Capitol grounds so that, fly him somewhere else so that he couldn't actually preside over the certification process, because the vice president, of course, has to be presiding over that certification process. There was talks of getting him out of D.C. There was a heated meeting between Trump and Pence. There was that reported, none of this is confirmed, but there was that reported meeting between Trump and Pence on January 5th, where Trump was trying to convince Pence to decertify the election. There's a lot. But anyway, Representative Cheney claimed that Pence was essentially giving the orders to try to defuse the situation, try to put in the National Guard, instead of President Trump. The committee then cited testimony from Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. Take a listen.
There were 2 or 3 calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere, but he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Miller. Get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
And then they also heard testimony from 2 first-hand witnesses of the event. The first was a Capitol police officer named Caroline Edwards, who was closer to the front of the Capitol when the siege began, then got injured, and then went back to fight, and then got injured again doing so. She recounted her experiences for the committee and explained the way that she saw things that day. Here's Officer Edwards.
It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe what I saw. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle. And that day, it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat, hours of dealing with things that were way beyond any law enforcement officer has ever trained for. And I just remember that moment of stepping behind the line and just seeing the absolute war zone that the West Front had become.
And the committee also interviewed British film and documentary maker Nick Quested, who got to meet with far-right groups and their leaders the night before the riot, as well as during the riots, and gave the committee some first-hand video of what happened and also what he documented and found during the riot. Listen to his testimony.
As stated, in the winter of 2020, I was working on a documentary. As part of that documentary, I filmed several rallies in Washington, D.C. on December the 11th and December the 12th. And I learned there would be a rally on the Mall on January 6th. So my 3 colleagues and I came down to document the rally. According to the permit of the event, there was going to be a rally at the Ellipse. We arrived at the Mall and observed a large contingent of Proud Boys marching towards the Capitol. We filmed them, and almost immediately I was separated from my colleagues. I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity. And for anyone who didn't understand how violent that event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it.
So those were some notable clips and testimony from the January 6th committee hearings last night. In addition to the claims that I just mentioned, they also said that there were Republican lawmakers who were seeking presidential pardons after the riot. The far-right group, the Proud Boys, actually started marching towards the Capitol even before Trump's speech in front of the Ellipse. And there were legitimate talks after the riot and during the riot. There were actual legitimate talks within the Trump administration about the invocation of the 25th Amendment of the Constitution that would have allowed the cabinet to eject President Trump from power. A lot happened, and a lot was revealed in those 2 hours of testimony. And, you know, when you look, let's very briefly take a look at the politics of what we just saw last night. What we saw was the committee trying to establish their view that Donald Trump incited the January 6th riots, like he was responsible for it. That's their goal. And the idea is that if they can provide sufficient evidence to suggest that the voter fraud claims were false, that he actively met and knew about the risks of January 6th and also did not act during the riot, they believe if they can get enough evidence to suggest that they can properly blame Donald Trump for what happened on January 6th. Now, this is the first of several hearings that they plan on holding just this month. So when I look at the work that they did last night, at least in that committee, or rather in that hearing, if I had to give them a rating out of 10, I would give them a 6. I don't think it did an amazing job. I don't think that they really landed on the points, but I also don't think they really failed. Like the clips from Bill Barr and Ivanka Trump were especially damning in terms of Trump's case with this. So there's a lot of gray area in terms of the success of last night's hearing. We'll have to keep watching the hearings this month to see what else they might bring up and what kind of evidence they might present to the American people. The next hearing will be on Monday, which is the 13th, I believe, where they plan on talking about the actual effort to convince the American public that there was widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election. So stay tuned for that. We'll see you next week. And so that does it for us here today at the Ishan S. Show. If you liked my commentary, then go ahead and follow at Ishan S. Show on Twitter and at the Ishan S. Show on Instagram for breaking news posts and updates about the show. If you want to learn more about political stories, then check out my political news blog on the IshanSshow.com and enter in your email to subscribe and just check out the ishaneshow.com. And do us a favor and share this episode and all other Ishan S Show content with your friends and family. It is the best way for this show to grow and get more people listening to it. And it helps out so much. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.